May 30th, they attack, and this guy says nothing. Suddenly, J6, though, oh my God, they're violent extremists. They're going to overthrow democracy. It's all nonsense.
So I waited to talk about January 6th because I thought that was going to be a specific topic that they get into. Pierce started it off more broadly, and I thought it was just sort of an overview. But like I said, you could see that, Andrew's wanting to jump into the meat and potatoes right out of the gate. You said this is where you're wrong.
These were political prisoners who were released. What happened is there was no fair application of the law whatsoever. These guys were being tried in D.C. There was a political witch hunt. We have more evidence every single day which provides for that. And why these guys are busy now complaining and showing us, oh, down here on the border, we have a mom crying because she might be separated from her kid. Nobody's commenting on the fact that we have a ton of families that just got reunited. And on behalf of all of the Wilsons of the world, welcome home, January 6ers. It's guys like this that wanted to put.
It's funny. It's an interesting spin on that. That's funny. Talking about reuniting families. It is sort of he's making an argument here that's sort of what the Democrat argument is, like the breaking up of families. But it's an argument that you could make about anyone that's charged with any crime. Like if you arrest a parent for, I don't know, negligent homicide, DUI, you'd say, but you're separating him from his family. You can't do that. Do you show up a camera in the kid's face that's crying, why are they taking daddy away? Of course not. So interesting spin that he put on there.
Put you away in a hole, in a dark hole, absent due process, and throw away the key. These were not violent criminals. By the way,
well, hang on. Okay, but Andrew, hang on. Let me just stop you there. So I actually interviewed one of the protesters, Jacob, who was the QAnon shaman guy. And I also had a Capitol police officer who'd been working that day. And what they both agreed, very interestingly, was that they both condemned the violence against police officers that day. So if you can have one of the protesters who'd just been pardoned concede that the violence that was perpetrated by some of the protesters was wrong, unacceptable, and should be condemned, why would you categorize it as non-violent?
Well, I didn't categorize it as non-violent. I said these are not violent criminals, which is how it's being
But if you're
framed.
perpetrating violence against police officers, it is, isn't it?
What? How many? A few?
So, seems like a gotcha at Andrew, and I can understand. Andrew worded this clumsily, right? Where it's like, well, clearly there were some violence. Don't you agree? Yes. So then how could you say they're all non-violent criminals? Andrew's making the point, basically, and he could be more clear here, but he's basically making the point that these were victims of a political witch hunt, and that our system says that you prioritize guilty people going free rather than putting innocent people in jail. And when the system itself is being ran in such a political manner, so instead of smearing all these people as they're all violent, bloodthirsty maniacs, blah, 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 it's unfair to call them that. That's basically the argument he's making. But I understand Cenk's laughter here, and how could you say there was violence, but they're nonviolent? Could be worded better by Andrew. We'll see.
A couple. This guy on May 30th of 2020, the White House was under siege. It was attacked. Over 100 Secret Service agents injured. They were burning down stations. This guy said, oh, well, Trump had to go hide out in his bunker. Can you imagine if the roles were reversed and Donald Trump came out and was like, oh, AOC had to go hide. Oh, these politicians had to go hide. He doesn't care about political violence. The left doesn't care about political violence at all. They'll use it when it's expedient for them. They always do. Pointing to a couple of bad actors at this thing and saying all of them have to be thrown away. And, the key thrown away with them is insanity. And no, I don't think so. I think it's a miscategorization to frame all of them as violent criminals. And that's
they
exactly
weren't all violent.
Okay, so full disclosure again, I think this is the argument I make most frequently. When dealing with this issue is the big issue with January 6th. I completely agree that there were people that acted violently. I think that there's so much going around the situation here. I think that what we're likely to find, if we ever find out the truth, I think what's likely to be is that institutional people, up to including people in our military, people connected to John Brennan, Nancy Pelosi, etc., wanted things to get out of hand so that they could point to it and say, see, this is what Trump supporters are all about. This is what Trump's all about. And I think that they were trying to set up an escalation of violence all throughout that summer. It's one of the reasons that the narrative against Trump, when we saw particularly Democratic cities, we saw Black Lives Matter rioting over and over again, looting businesses, burning down private property, attacking law enforcement. The same people now that are telling you, oh, you have to respect law enforcement, they were making excuses for those Black Lives Matter and Antifa rioters, up to the point where Trump had to threaten to send in the National Guard, and then the narrative was etched in stone that the Democrats wanted. Trump's starting to use our military against American citizens. He's a fascist. Trump didn't take that bait, which he should have. He should have sent in the National Guard. Maybe we would have avoided Kyle Rittenhouse having to kill people in self-defense. Maybe that would have happened had the National Guard. Now, of course, the National Guard being sent in isn't something that I call for lightly. I think actually what should have happened was that the local police forces were enabled to be deployed to stop this sort of violence. But it didn't go with the narrative that the Democrats were pushing. They wanted to force Trump's hand. January 6th was a similar situation. I think we'll find out. I've talked about this at great length. The person that was in charge of the defense of the Capitol today, Capitol Chief Sund, has talked about how he basically feels that people in the military and people connected to Nancy Pelosi, or Sergeant at Arms in particular, ensured that he was incapable of requesting the National Guard that would have stopped the violence before it made it to the Capitol. Instead, what they wanted was that violence to make it onto the Capitol proper so that they could say, look how violent these insurrectionists are. That's my belief. It could go further than that. There's so many questions surrounding the pipe bomb, etc., what the FBI knew, all of the shady stuff that occurred around there. It could be that confidential human sources, etc., within the FBI, like other cases like the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping case, like cases we saw with the Islamic shooter in Texas at the Dra Muhammad cartoons. It could be that the FBI itself, through either agents of itself or confidential human sources, were encouraging violence to occur. I don't know. I can't speak to that, but those are all certain possibilities. But they wanted this act of violence to occur. Now, they also refused to condemn or downplay the violence that we saw that was far grander and worse that occurred all throughout the summer of 2020. Why was it worse? Well, one, quantitatively, it was worse, because it happened many times, many days, and affected many more people. Secondly, the specifics of it were worse because the violent mobs actually killed people. None of that occurred on January 6th. There were people that died, but they were all on the other side of the ledger. Third, it was worse because it attacked private property. And as bad as attacking public institutions is, and I by no means am I saying that that's something that should be done, in many ways, it's actually worse to attack private property. If you feel, for example, that the government is corrupt or systemically racist, attacking someone's private property, burning it to the ground, looting it, etc., is in no way, shape, or form morally defensible. At least you can make an argument if you think that government is corrupt, then you attack that government building. Again, not one I agree with, but perceptually at least makes sense. Now, the truth of the matter is, like I mentioned earlier, people like Cenk, they don't care at all about this violence. When it was violence being done in the name of Democrats, they were more than happy to downplay it. Mostly peaceful, right? Even though when we saw people were dying, law enforcement was being harmed, people's personal property was being destroyed, they didn't care. Always downplay it. Always downplay it. It's the language of the unheard. And then comes May 30th, 2020. Now, I don't know how much Andrew is going to get into it, but he makes the right argument here. And I have to admit, I've waited to debate Cenk or Mehdi Hassan on this specific topic for years now, based on the commentary that they made after May 30th, 2020. Now, you wouldn't know if you only consumed the mainstream news, but there was a violent attack on our White House that evening, May 30th going into May 31st, 2020. In the name of the George Floyd protest, things got out of hand in D.C., as we knew that they would. Violent rioters started to attack the White House grounds. Outside the White House, there's sort of a perimeter that was set up around sort of a, I don't know what the word you would use is, sort of a quad. And so they had temporary fencing set up, etc., to prevent people from getting closer to the White House. Over and over again, those Secret Service people and law enforcement were pushed back. A building that was temporarily set up as a guard station was burned to the ground, unlike any building on January 6th. They continued to attack law enforcement. The report said it was with chemical agents, bludgeoning weapons, laser pointers designed to blind them. There's video of this. You can see I covered it on the night as it was occurring. I covered these riots. People were talking how they were attacking Secret Service. They got up to the White House fence in an attempt to get into the White House before they were eventually pushed back. That's how close they came to our White House. The difference between that and January 6th is one of the worst kept secrets in our country was how violent these lefties were over and over. We saw what they did in Trump's inauguration in 2016. We saw how the left engaged in violence anytime they thought there was an excuse for police brutality, etc., with the Trayvon Martin stuff, with the Michael Brown stuff. So everyone in every city where they knew that there was going to be a Black Lives Matter protest knew that there was a good chance that violence would erupt. And so they had an adequate police presence to stop it from getting into buildings like the White House. When it comes to Trump supporters, you can count the number of times on the hand that there was violence that occurred at their rallies other than mutual combat between like Antifa and Proud Boys type people. Charlottesville, if you want to consider that, Trump supporters, and January 6th. The truth is, most people expected those rallies to go off without a hitch. Now, the narrative now from the Democrats is, oh, the FBI and all these organizations had evidence that there was about to be a violent insurrection that was targeting congresspeople and Mike Pence in an attempt to kill them. But they also felt that it wasn't important enough to actually have adequate security there. So much so that we're told that Nancy Pelosi, Sergeant-at-Arms, under the word of Nancy Pelosi, and career military personnel, Lieutenant General, said, nah, we think this is a violent insurrection about to overthrow the government, but we can't send in the National Guard because of optics. That's the narrative that we're told to believe by the Democrats. So while this occurred, I know I'm being a bit wordy here, but it's important to set the stage because many of you may have never heard about May 30th, 2020. That's the difference. There was adequate police presence there to push them back because the Democrats didn't have interest in a narrative that left-wingers broke into the White House in an effort to get Donald Trump. But nonetheless, the threat was taken so seriously by the Secret Service that they had to move Trump to a secure bunker. That's how serious they took the threat. And our national media, punditry, and just in general Democrats, some of them took to making fun of Trump for having to be moved to a bunker. By their own definitions that they tried to use about January 6th, this would qualify as an insurrection, and yet they didn't take it solemnly. The FBI didn't have a massive task force. In fact, my research has found maybe only 2 people that were arrested in the whole thing. Hundreds of Secret Service agents armed. There wasn't a mass outcry. There wasn't sedition hunters where everyone's face that was at that riot was put up on TV so that children could turn in their parents. Didn't happen. The man who would become president, Joe Biden, 2 weeks after this, told Trump that he ought to, quote, stay in his bunker and shut his mouth. That's right, Joe Biden himself making fun of Donald Trump for having to be moved to a bunker. And in this specific debate, Andrew is correct to point this out. I wish he would have done a better job, specifically saying, Cenk, this is exactly what you did. Instead, he leaves it a little vague so the audience might not understand. Cenk Uygur himself went to X, then Twitter, multiple times, including right after May 30th, and made fun of Trump for having to be moved to a bunker. Hashtag bunker boy. It was the top trending hashtag on Twitter. Ha ha! Violent rioters attacked the White House and Trump was so afraid he had to move to a bunker. Now look at their outrage over January 6th. 100% performative. Andrew Wilson absolutely nails him. Absolutely. The truth is they'll say things like, again, go back to the kids in cages. Andrew, kids in cages are bad. Here's a kid that was in a cage under Trump. And they expect to be able to have this moral high ground. You could never defend kids in cages. You're just wrong. And then when you're like, but Cenk, when there were 10 times more kids in cages under Biden, you made fun of them. You're like, oh, look at these little shits. They deserve to be in cages. Why the double standard? One, it shows they don't care about what they're pretending to. And second, it shows that they know you do. They know that the average conservative doesn't like the fact that there was violence that occurred on January 6th. They might blame the police more. They might say that it was overinflated in the media and the Democrats. But the Democrats don't give a shit about that. They don't care at all. Not all of them, but people like Cenk. Why is it evidenced? Because they made fun of Trump when he had to be moved to a bunker. When violent insurrectionists, their words, not mine, attacked the White House on May 30th, 2020. They voted for a guy named Joe Biden who also made fun of Trump. Now remember, these same Democrats supported the Colorado Supreme Court decision that said that Trump ought to be taken off the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And as evidence, they said he incited an insurrection or participated in an insurrection because he said things like fight like hell. Do you think for a moment, if Donald Trump came out after January 6th and was like, ha, look at these crying cowards like Adam Kissinger, they had to be moved to a secure location, ha ha, bunker boy. Do you think for a second that wouldn't have been included in that Colorado court case as evidence that Trump participated in an insurrection? And yet when Joe Biden does it, when Cenk Uygur does it, when other members of the media does it, they're like, oh, it's just a joke, no big deal. That's how you know their outrage over January 6th is performative. They didn't care when the White House was attacked, May 30th. They made fun of Trump for it. But all they've done since January 6th is clutch their pearls.
I mean,
that's what he was doing. That's what he was framing it, though.
Yeah, no, listen, I don't, and Cenk, I do not agree with that. I don't think all the 1,500 were violent. In fact, we know for a fact they weren't. A lot of them were not convicted of violence.
Yeah, I didn't say that at all.
That.
So, look.
Cenk didn't say those words. He didn't say they were all violent. Andrew's right that perceptually, that's the narrative that's been painted. Andrew needs to do a better job of delineating why everyone needed to be pardoned if he's conceding that there were a small amount that were violent. And he's already given the answer, but he needs to buckle down on it because the entire system was corrupt in two ways. One, it was corrupt in how it handled all these trials. You could see the more you dig into these trials that the judges were more interested in optics and show trials. They withheld exculpatory evidence. We had agents that were on the ground that lied about things that were going on. They all had to be tried in D.C., which was a tainted jury pool. They weren't allowed to be moved from that pool. And then the other reason it was corrupt is the blatant double standard that the FBI and other institutions went after these people versus how they went after violent lefties that were rioting for political reasons. The truth is that we cannot have a system of justice that is two-tiered. We can't have a system of justice that says we'll prosecute every jaywalker if they're Republican, but none if they're Democrat. We can't have that. It either has to be prosecute both groups or prosecute neither. And because they chose to be so light-handed on the Democrats and Democratic voters that rioted over and over and over again for political reasons, and then chose to be as aggressive as possible going after the January 6th people, the best thing to do to move forward as a country was either to, one, aggressively try to lock up all of these left-wingers that rioted in the summer of 2020, including large investigations into politicians and media members that were saying things that we find insightful. This would include people like Maxine Waters, AOC, Joe Biden, Cenk Uygur, etc. Or you pardon all of the January 6th people in an attempt to try to move forward. So I think we'll see if Andrew gets to those arguments, but I think that would where he needs to go. But pointing out the double standard of Cenk, and again, I hope that Andrew holds his feet more to the fire here. We're talking about you personally, Cenk. You personally made fun of Trump. Why? And now you're going to pretend to take January 6th importantly?
No, all right, whatever, dude. So on the Young Turks, we've been super clear about this. And as always, we're the one guys setting people who are fair. You'll see both sides do all this extreme stuff like Andrew's doing. So first of all, the people who went to the speech of Donald Trump, a lot of times they get thrown into this. And I have always said, no, that's not fair. They didn't go down to the Capitol. For the people who went to the Capitol, it's an obvious crime to break into the Capitol. And why were they doing that? They were trying to overturn the results of the election. So you could blah, blah, blah on all your talking points, but it's absurdity. Obviously, they were trying to hurt our democracy. They were trying to steal that election. And
what was happening May 30th, and what was happening with the people that rioted during the inauguration? And again, yes, there are a bunch of people that thought the election was stolen and thought that they saw evidence of it, particularly COVID being used as an excuse to change the rules, that they then thought led to a bunch of shady stuff happening with mail-in ballots, right or wrong. That's what they felt. They wanted that to be dealt with, investigated, etc. That's not an attack on democracy any more than saying Democrats that feel that rioted or protested because they feel that Donald Trump stole an election because Russia tried to interfere, which remember a YouGov poll in 2018 showed that 2/3 of Democrats believed that Russia personally hacked voting machines to change results in favor of Donald Trump. Something there was never any proof of whatsoever. And yet 2/3 of Democrats believe that. But the point is, notice how he's not answering for the double standard. It's always couched in this hyperbolic language. Oh, it's an attack on democracy. It's never an attack on democracy when the left does things. That's never an attack on democracy. Was the assassination attempt an attack on democracy? Was when Steve Scalise got shot an attack on democracy? Was when Rand Paul got attacked an attack on democracy? When they attacked ICE facilities, was that an attack on democracy? when they attack police stations. Is that an attack on democracy? No, it's never couched in that sort of language, is it? And so they get away with this stuff with all but impunity. Yeah, that's bad. Basically, whitewash it away. And then predictably, when the other side says, oh, that's the rules of engagement, you get to riot when things don't go your way, and then a small handful of people do that in a larger rally, they say, predictably, this is the worst thing ever. But notice Cenk doesn't answer the accusation. He's just like, no, we call balls and strikes on both sides. Then Cenk, why are you making fun of Trump when he had to be moved to a bunker? Is that balls and strikes? Let's see if he answers it.
Some of them violent? Were all of them violent? No. Were some of them violent? Obviously. We have eyes and ears. So you can do all the propaganda you want, but we just watch the tape of them trying to beat the crap out of the cops. I thought you guys cared about cops. I care about crime. I'm against crime. And, we take heat sometimes from the left because they think that crime is a right-wing narrative and doesn't actually exist. Well, the voters just showed you it does exist, and they're pissed about it. But they're also pissed about it when you go beat up cops for Trump. So look, I'm past it because the American people voted. They put Trump back in office, and that's pretty definitive. I didn't want that, but it happened, right? But if you're going to try to do...
He's not past it. His opening statement talked about the problems with pardoning January 6ers. So if he's like, yeah, I'm past it, the American people... Yes, the American people voted, and they knew that Donald Trump ran on a promise of pardoning a lot of January 6 people, if not all of them. So when he says, I'm over it, the people voted, that's not true. That's why this topic came up.
Revisionist history that these were some patriots who showed up for a picnic, but oh golly gee, there was a Capitol, so they started to bust in and beat the living crap out of the cops. And oh, he lost the election, but oh no, it was stolen. So they go and try to do a coup attempt. I hate it. I think it's a terrible
coup attempt. What made it a coup attempt? And again, what this does is it whitewashes the events that actually occurred on January 6th and the events we saw on May 30th and all the other violent wing, left wing attacks. Why were none of them called coups? When they took the Chaz zone and they took 6 city blocks for multiple weeks, was that an insurrection? Was that a coup? That's different. I bet they didn't use that language then. Did they? Now here's the truth. There are people that engaged in acts of violence on January 6th and they deserve to be punished. They should have been punished proportionately to what the people that were on the left that engaged in acts of violence attacking police officers all throughout that summer were treated. Many of those people that attacked police on on the Summer of Love, they got large settlements. Is what they got instead of jail time. Nonetheless, that's the proportionality that we should do. The law has to be applied equally or as equal as possible, particularly when it comes across a spectrum such as political identity. You can't charge Republicans one way and Democrats another. You can't do that. And that's what's occurring. The other thing that it ignores is even though violence occurred, and I'm not excusing it, in fact, I condemned violence on January 6th. On January 6, 2020, I have a video that's still up on places like Odyssey where you can see that. I was maybe the first right-wing commentator to condemn forms of violence, and certainly some occurred. Many of those people have spent 2-3 years in prison already. So for the greater good, I have no problem pardoning them. But if you watch the actual videos of what was occurring, if you just watch the end result, look, there's a guy clashing with police. But do they talk about the police shooting rubber bullets and tear gas into peaceful protesters beforehand? Do they talk about the police rushing in and attacking people beforehand? No, they don't, do they? But they're quick to do that if it was a black civil rights movement, and I just showed you pictures of a black man punching a police officer and said, look at that! That was Martin Luther King's rally? That happened there? My God! They would say, wait a minute, what's the greater context? But notice he hasn't answered that he made fun of Trump for being in a bunker. He just said, no, we wouldn't do that. We take violence against police seriously. Really? Then why did you downplay it by making fun of Trump for having to be moved to a bunker?
Precedent, and I think every time you guys defend it, you sound absurd, and it sounds like overwhelming, ridiculous propaganda.
Andrew?
Yeah, what it's about is a fair application of law. And there has not been fair application of law here. Cenk himself cannot even do fair application of law. At the same time, he says, oh, they're trying to coup and overthrow the democracy. It's exactly what happened May 30th when they were attacking the White House. They were attacking Secret Service agents. They wanted to get in there. And all he could do was whine about how Trump had to get sent to a bunker. Where was his outrage about the coup d'etat? Where was he when Black Lives Matter was burning down cities?
There was no coup
Nowhere.
on May 30th. It was a protest.
He was saying instead, Cenk didn't interrupt.
Did you see that? May 30th wasn't a coup, it was a protest. Define coup. They injured over 100 Secret Service and law enforcement people using weapons that could be considered lethal, burnt down a building in an attempt to break into the White House. What do you think they were going to do if they got into the White House? Shake Trump's hand? Hi, Mr. President. Thanks for inviting us in. You think that's what they were going to do? That's what you think was going to happen? Why were they using violence in an attempt to get in if they just really wanted to get in and meander about the... Now, didn't he just criticize the straw man that he made about Andrew Wilson and said, oh, you said that they're just all having a picnic on January 6th. And yet, that's exactly what he wants to do then. Notice how the standard's completely different? Now, I know, and this is a little unfair, from listening to Andrew debate about these things in the past, and he happens to agree with me on this, I wouldn't call May 30th, 2020 an insurrection or a coup, but I also wouldn't call January 6th an insurrection or a coup. But when you ask these people, well, define insurrection or coup, they'll come up with a definition that's so broad so that they can say, see, January 6th falls into that. Oh, it's, but violence, multiple people gathered together breaking the law for a political agenda. Okay, that's basically Black Lives Matter in a nutshell. So that's a coup. That's an insurrection, right? Well, no, that's just a protest that got out of hand. That's all that is. That wasn't a coup. Them attacking the White House and trying to get to Donald Trump, that was just a protest that got a little out of hand. That's all it was. But January 6th is an insurrection, a coup, and you're making it sound like a picnic. Andrew's like, listen, you as an individual made fun of Trump for having to be moved to a bunker when 100 Secret Service agents were injured, when violent lefties attacked the White House on May 30th, 2020. You not only didn't take it seriously, you made fun of Trump for having to be moved. And that's basically the tenor that almost all of the Democrats made. Either they ignored it, or they made fun of Trump, etc. Then on January 6th, you're like, most serious thing ever, oh my God, clutching pearls for years afterwards. Secondly, Andrew says, there's a double standard in the application of law, how the FBI and politicians have treated this. And Cenk proves Andrew's point by immediately being like, May 30th wasn't a coup. That's different. It was different. It was just, it was just a little mistake. That's all it was, a little mistake. So it was okay that violent lefties had tried to attack Donald Trump, and I made fun of Trump for it, because it wasn't a big deal. That's Andrew's entire argument. You've treated these things with the double standard. Now, is it true that they're not one, like any two situations that have ever occurred in the world, they're not one-to-one, a comparison, but they're close enough. And the fact that right now, in literally, within a 1-minute segment, Cenk strawmans Andrew and says, oh, you're saying January 6th was just a picnic, which he never said, and then instantly goes to when talking about May 30th, when he himself, not some abstract, this is what Republicans, this is what Democrats said, Cenk himself made fun of Trump for having to be moved to a bunker. His go-to right out of the way is to downplay the violence. It wasn't that big of a deal. Wasn't a coup.
Up you once. Do you think calm down for me? So anyway, what's going on, very simply, is that he has the revisionist history. While at the same time, the Democrats are saying, you got to stay home and stay masked up. They're telling other people, go outside, burn down cities, make Chaz chop, a nice free independent zone. I don't know how you could say that that's anything other than an insurrection, to say that this is now no longer part of the United States government, have your own armed militia there. The entire 9 yards, May 30th, they attack. And this guy says nothing. Suddenly, J6, though, oh my God, they're violent extremists. They're going to overthrow democracy. It's all nonsense. It's not fairly applied. He's never fairly applied it. The law has never been fairly applied to the J6ers. They were tried in D.C., not in front of impartial juries. And here's how our law works. Our law works like this. 1,000 walk free, so one guilty person doesn't spend a day in prison. That is the precedent for our law. That's why they got pardoned, and it's exactly why they should have.
He misspoke a little. It's that we would rather 1,000 guilty go free than one innocent person be jailed. That's what he's saying, and I think everyone understands that's what he's saying here. That's absolutely correct. Our legal system is foundationally founded on the principle that it's innocent until proven guilty, and that there's as close to possible as equal application to law. Now, there's going to be unequal application that are built into the system, such as if you're a billionaire, you probably have access to a better legal defense than if you're poor. But we're supposed to try to limit those disparate advantages as much as possible. And instead, what we see here are advantages being conferred based on your political orientation. Democrats get treated with kid gloves in almost every institution, whether it be the actual law enforcement themselves, or the investigators like the FBI that come afterwards, or the judges, or the prosecutors, or the media that's covering it. All of it is treated as harshly as possible over people that are supposedly connected to MAGA, but as lightly as possible when it comes to people that are connected to Democrats that are rioting when it comes to the 2020.